All right, man. With the Detroit Pistons, once again, wait till the 2027 trade deadline to make a move. There's been some inklings out there that they still could be trying to get Kyrie. I did a video on that. So could they, really, be sitting there trying to wait to the trade deadline again? And last year I think they had a huge plunder or a huge miss by not getting CJ McCollum, and they wouldn't even had to worry about that. They wouldn't even have to worry about it, in my opinion. But check out Detroit Pistons to our playlist. Thumbs up the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel. And one of the reasons is a lot of those guys that they signed the contracts or they traded for, they'll be eligible to trade some of those guys in some of those contracts and make something work. So most people will probably, say that, they probably didn't get as good as they wanted them to get. I think could they be better from last year? I mean, that's contingent on a lot of things. When you're talking about are the Pistons better, it's contingent on how, Collins fit. So some people will say Collins is an upgrade. I mean, defensively, I still think Tobias is better, but, Collins is more athletic. On most years, he's rebounding the ball better. He's shooting the ball a lot better, so a lot more consistent spacing and shooting. He can literally easily be a 2010 guy. I want to say at some point he was that. I think he really would thrive with Cade Cunningham. He's a Utah boy, by the way. So, last year he was 15 and let's see, let's get in though. But I think in general, before we kind of get to this part, I think what it really hinges on is improvement. Is improvement. So right here, last year he was at 13, 5, and 1, and them 5 rebounds is very, abnormal for him from what I understand. Other years 8. He was 22 and 10 in Atlanta in 1920. His second year in the league, he was 19 and a half and 9.8 rebounds. So he can be a 2010 guy. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the previous year he played 40 games. He was 19 and 8. If he give you 19 and 8 or he give you this 20 and 10, I mean, that's a huge upgrade. You know what I'm saying? That's a huge upgrade. But then you start to talk about, Isaiah Joe, what he going to bring to the table, probably more athleticism, probably better defensively if you're going to be in there starting. You're able to move Duncan to the bench, so you're stronger based off that. So you're shooting your lineup. You don't lose nothing from Duncan, Isaiah. You gain a little bit more offensive athleticism. Got a knockdown shooter in John Collins who can be a high rebounder by this league's, I think the only thing you're really missing is somebody that can get their own shot in that lineup. Dennis Jenkins, you hope that he takes a step forward. I think you might see a Buko Corey in there with Jenkins a lot. I think at that point, you see, Herter, Wu, Paul Reed, you'll see a lot of these dudes that's there. But I think really if they're going to take a significant step forward, and it's not going to deal with a Kyrie or a KD or someone like that, if there's going to be a significant step forward made, it's going to be Doran takes a step, Asar and Ron Hollins, one or both takes a step offensively. Dennis Jenkins and Cade take a major step. Abuka Corey comes in and he takes a step. Herter get back in rhythm. So a lot of it is, they banking on the self-improvement. But if Asar and Ron is able to, one of them is able to shoot the ball a lot better, I think the Pistons in a lot of better play. But I think come trade deadline, if none of that happens, I think they'd be a lot more aggressive this year. Especially when you kind of see where, New Orleans is at, you'll see where Brooklyn is at, MPJ, been talks about him, and it's kind of hard to get him without Jalen Duren. It's going to be talks about that and about getting him. And then you're going to have some conversations about, wherever Golden State is at that point, wherever Houston is at. It's going to be a lot of teams, maybe Phoenix ain't where they really want to be at that point. We're getting Miles Bridges and Jalen Green, I think, having 2 more years on that contract, or a year and a half at that point, or season and a half. So the trade deadline may have opportunities. We don't know where Orlando, they taking away to see approach. You may be able to pick something off of there. I mean, it's going to be very interesting, and you may be one of those teams the Pistons may not be performing well and may be selling some things off. Who knows? You know, the Knicks went through a big transition losing Mitchell Robinson, to be honest. They went through a huge transition losing Mitchell Robinson. That was one of the difference makers that they had. You know, honestly, it was one of the difference makers that they had. And it's one of the difference makers that they had in beating Victor Wembanyama, that extra body. You know? So, but in general, you know, I think knowing what they know now, they're probably going to be a lot more aggressive at the next trade deadline. Knowing what they know now, they're going to be significantly more aggressive at that trade deadline. But they got the pieces to do so. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting because, you know, a lot of us been holding out for hope here and there. But I think at that point, if that, you know, some of these teams not doing well, some of these guys be eligible to get traded sometime in December. I think you're going to see the Pistons kind of, you know, I think you're going to see them be a little more aggressive. And I think if they had to do it over again, they would have got CJ McCollum. You know, they would have got CJ McCollum if they could have did it over again. I'll tell you that right now. They would have got McCollum if they could do it over again. I promise you they would. I promise you they would. So, but I think the trade deadline, you know, depending on how they doing, depending on how the Eastern Conference is doing, you know, I think the trade deadline is how the Pistons is doing. It's going to be interesting. But I mean, obviously they got hurdles to go over now. They still, you know, giving opportunity. They're still looking at guys. They're still looking at guys as far as like Kyrie, KD, still hearing those talks, but also, you know, they may be perfectly stand pat and, you know, and they're monitoring what Asar Thompson, what Ron Hollins is doing this offseason. They're monitoring that. So in general, you know, by the time you get to February, you may see some of these guys you wasn't expecting to see out of here if they really not moving the penalty, because you got to pay Ron in a minute too, you know, so you got to remember that. You got to pay Ron. You got to pay Ron in a minute too. So that's going to be the interesting thing. But I think the trade deadline for them is going next year. It's going to be dependent on Ron, Asar, how offensively they doing. I mean, the bare minimum, Ron, Asar offensively they doing. How these other pieces fitting, because Isaiah Joe's on a 1-year deal. Collins is on a non-guaranteed deal. You know what I'm saying? So it's going to be kind of how some of these guys is how they looking. If they playing high-profile basketball and they rolling, they may get to the trade deadline and may not make another move. They might, if they rolling, they look pretty good, they may get that final piece, you know? So a lot of those guys who had high value, Trey Murphy, Kyrie, and this all, it might drop come the regular season. So I think it's no real rush, but we'll see what it is. Check out Detroit Pistons Talk playlist, thumbs up the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel. Hit the link in the description. Find me everywhere from Instagram to Facebook, X, the whole 9. Peace.